Welcome. This is Lon Hyatt with Art by Lon Hyatt. Today in this class we're going to be painting a rainbow aspen. So today with this rainbow aspen, I'm going to show you the tools I'm using. I will provide a list in the details of everything I used in the specifics. But we're going to use a 1-inch flat brush. We want a small detail brush, so I'm also going to use a 0 or a 00 would be fine. And then I'm going to use a number 4 round. Varying sizes are fine. These are just the ones that I'm going to use. Feel free to work with what you have and modify and do as you need to. For colors, I'm going to keep it simple. We're going to use straight colors. I'm not going to mix colors on this painting to keep it simple. The background color, we're going to do a mix of the cobalt blue. That's going to be mixed with some white. That's about the only mixing that we're going to do. As far as colors go, I'm going to use a light green. I'll list specifically what I'm using, but a light green, a yellow. I'm using primary yellow, a red, and a darker green. So we have 7 colors total, including black and white. One other tool that we're going to use today is one of the trending tools. You can use any brush for this, but I like to use the Q-tip. I found that is a fun way to add leaves to your detailed paintings, and it's just fun and you can throw it away when you're done. So for today's painting, I'm going to be using a 10 by 20 canvas, just a basic canvas, nothing special. If you're going to use anything bigger or smaller, just adjust your proportions according to the size you're going to be using. I'm also going to be using a standard palette. If you don't have a palette, you can always use a paper plate. They're easy, the mess is easy to clean up, and you'll be done, throw it away. So in the painting today, we're going to do a little bit of mixing. I had spoken that we weren't going to do much of that before, but today for the background, we need to get a couple tones to give a little bit of depth and not just a monocolor tone to the background. So also, one of the key things I use paper towels. They're easy to dispose of, or you can use a paint rag if you have such a thing. And then I also use a palette knife for mixing my paint. So what I've done now is I've added some white for 2 different mixes. This one I'm going to use as my standard white, and that's a titanium white. And then I have the cobalt blue and the titanium white here, and I'm basically just going to mix it up and give it a good thorough mixing so that the color has completely distributed between it. Kind of gotten it light. I don't want the background to be too dark because it's kind of a spring day. It's not going to be overly light, overly dark, just something to contrast the tree so it pops out. So with that said, that's about the tonnage that I'm going to use for the background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it in a crisscross kind of fashion. And then once I get basically a color on the back, I'm going to add in some white, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, using my 1-inch flat brush or anything comparable to that, I'm just going to come in and I'm just going to kind of crisscross across it. I'm not really worried about consistency right now. And I may want to bring in a little bit more blue if it doesn't look dark enough or enough contrast for me. But you can do that as you go. So right now we're just trying to get the canvas covered. And once we get it pretty close to covered, we'll then bring in the white to kind of break it up a little bit. So again, this is pretty quick, and I'm using acrylic paint, so it dries fairly quickly, and you'll want to know that if you're using oil, it ultimately takes a lot longer to dry and you have a lot more manipulation time. But with acrylics, you've got about a half an hour before it's set and ready to go. Less if you're using thin coats of it. All right, so I'm getting close, and this part is pretty quick. Again, you're not looking for perfection here. You're going to fill in the blanks with other color to kind of give it that marbled look. All right, so that's basically the blue. Now I want to break that up and bring in some white just to kind of break up the blue a little bit and just give it a little bit more of a texture. Again, I am not covering it 100%. And again, I like to break it up by giving it a kind of a cross-hatching, a crisscrossing effect. And it's just so it doesn't look the same color. And you know what? I think I'm going to bring in a little bit more blue just to show you what the impact of the original color will look and how you can play that in. So pretty drastic, but then you come in and you just want to mix and blend, break it up, push it around. And when you're all said and done, it'll give you a nice contrast to set your tree in front of. And again, on these, I do a lot of layering. And you've heard a lot of artists talk about they'll start from the farthest point in the back, which is true. And you want to come forward as you're painting your layers. So the first thing we're doing is we're doing the background, obviously. All right. I don't want to see any canvas left showing on the front especially. So anywhere you might have a little bit of white canvas showing, you want to make sure you get that covered with the original blue or one of the adjacent colors that you've added since the beginning. I think we're pretty close on this. And you see it's just kind of no set wrong or right. You just want to kind of break it up, not have it be monotonous with one color, one stroke, one direction. Directionality helps with the curvatures of our paintings and such like that. So don't be afraid to try things you're not used to doing with it. So this is the background. I think this is fairly good to go forward with. What we'll have to do is give it a minute or two to dry. With acrylics, just give it a good 10 minutes. Again, watching paint dry, it can get monotonous, but that's what painters do for a living. We watch paint dry. So give this a good 10 minutes before you get back into bringing in the next colors, and I'll be there with you to do that. So for cleaning my brushes and such like that, I usually use 2 cups of water. One's a clean water and one's basically where you scrub all the hard paint off and such like that. And then I also use the paper towels to dry them. So you don't want to leave your paintbrush wet with paint for long, especially with acrylics, because it will dry it out and then your brush becomes unusable. So get it into the water, scrub it off, get it as clean as you can, as quick as you can. And then, I just use paper towels or a paint rag and just dry it off so it's not dripping. Because if you add dripping water to a painted painting, the water will come off and run down the painting and mess it up. So, and then for my knife, I just, keep it clean because you're going to be mixing colors and grabbing other colors and you don't want it to be corrupting the color you're using. So moving on, we're going to start to lay out the tree. We're going to use white and some black to build the tree. So for making the tree, you're going to have white, gray, and black in the trunk of the tree. So I've got a little bit of black and a little bit of white. This is too much for what I need, but I'm going to take a little bit of my white with my spatula knife. I'm going to take a little bit of my black, bring it over here, and I just want to I'm going to be using shadows and shading. So really, that is probably fine as far as the color goes. But if it's too dark, just add a little more white to it until you get the right tone you want. So for me, it's going to be a real light gray, not dark, and the black is going to be the contrast. So those are about the 3 colors we're going to be using for the tree. Primary is going to be the white. Let me clean my knife and then we'll get to painting. All right, I'm going to use my 0 brush for kind of outlining the paint or outlining the tree, just because I kind of want to sketch it out a little bit before I actually commit to coloring it and sizing it. So I'm going to kind of pick the middle of it, and I'm just going to kind of come straight up. This is the direction I want the tree to go, and I'm going to take it up to about right out there. So that's kind of the base of what we're going to do with the tree. So once I've got that identified, I can then kind of come in, start to just build a trunk. And you know what? I'm going to make this tree a little bit fuller than my last one. And that's the nice thing about painting, is you can adjust as you go. But once you kind of get the sketch of what you're doing and what you're sizing, now I'm going to go clean this brush, because I'm going to use it again later for touch-ups and for fine detail. But now I'm going to bring in my round, and that is a number 4 round. I'm going to get it a little bit wet, basically just dipping the end into the water. Then I'm going to kind of wipe it off so it's not going to drip. Gives me a little bit more fluidity. And then I'm going to start to fill in my tree. And right now I'm just going, it's a little bit dry, so I'm going to bring in a little bit of water. Basically I'm going to drip the water in. I'm going to bring it into my palette. That will thin out my paint a little bit, and that gives me the ability to really smoothly pull it in the directions we need to go. If the paint is too dry, pulling against your canvas, you'll really feel it in your brush. So you really want it to be a moist brush so that it's smoothly going over your canvas. If you're having to really pull the paint, add a little bit of water. So this part is subjective. Your tree may not look like my tree, and that's okay. We all have a different eye and a different perspective on what we're going to do and see. So there is no wrong answer. Just know that this is your artistic journey, and you're going to create what your vision is. And feel free to stretch it a little bit, you know? Get outside the norm, do what you want to do. If you don't want a lot of branches, great. We'll make that work. So right now I'm just kind of filling in that trunk, and you can kind of see the layering in it a little bit, and I'm just kind of building up to bringing out the limbs and stuff. I'm not going to do that quite yet, just because I want to get the size correct before I move on to the next step. I kind of like my trunk. I think that's probably a good width. Getting to the right size, going trunk up. And as the tree gets higher, I'm going to start to fan out a little bit lightly, not heavily, because I want to kind of feel out where my branches are going to go, because I want to be able to fill in my gaps so I can fill my canvas with color. So again, I keep using a little bit of water. I'm bringing it into my palette and basically just giving it a little bit thinner. This is a heavy acrylic, so adding some moisture, and I tend to use water because it's easier and it's cheaper. And it ultimately will give you a thinner paint as you apply it. So this will take you a few minutes. So once you get this step done, get the tree whited out, we'll come back and we'll go to the next step. Okay, so now you should have your trunk mostly painted. And I'm going from the round. I actually brought in my 0, the smaller fine tooth, to kind of do the finer tooth, the thinner branches and stuff like that. Again, use what you're comfortable with. If you can use this brush and just not press hard, then you can get the same effect. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. So now what we're going to do is we're going to clean the brushes. We're going to get the white off. And I'm going to use my detail brush, which is my finer tip. That's my 0. And now remember, we mixed some gray and some black. You know how aspens have that black bark and it interchanges, and almost like they have eyes at times. We're going to kind of bring in some of those features to make it more authentically an aspen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of the gray and a little bit of the black, and I'm basically just going to come in here and I'm going to just show some imperfections. No consistency. We're going to fan this a little bit. We're going to fade this a little bit. You're just kind of giving it some play, and also something that I haven't touched on yet, but highlights and lowlights are important as you're building your painting. Obviously, the direction of the sun, or where the sun's location is to your painting, will have an effect on the shadowing and the brightness. So highlights, usually the sun is above us coming down. So if the sun is up here, which we're going to assume today, then that means the low lights will be on the undersides of the brushes, the branches and stuff like that. So they will have a little bit more dark shading to them because they don't get direct light under the edge of the branch. And so this is going to give us the ability to give that depth through shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and just use this. I'm coming in here. I'm going to put some more black on my trunk. Again, no real perfect or wrong answer. Traditionally, you see a lot of the black where the branch meets the tree. So you kind of just give it a little bit of a, you know, if the branch is coming into the tree there, then it's going to have a little bit of a imperfection with the black coming in. And we'll bring in some shadow and some shading once we get this initial low light put in. Right now it looks rudimentary, but we will do a little bit of shading and blending to bring it in cleaner. Right now we're just putting down some bold. Again, light brush, less paint. You don't want to like saturate it and completely cover. You're just wanting to give it an accent. This is the underside of a branch. It's got a little bit of shadow under it. It's not getting the sun. Where branches meet, that's where they get darker. There's more imposing obstacles in the way of the light. And again, we're not going for perfection here because ultimately we're going to be adding color over this. This is a layer that's going to be behind our leaves. So ultimately when we're done, you won't see a lot of this. You'll see some of it, of course, and it's the peekaboo effect that we want to have pop with these touches of shadow. So I've come in here and I've given a little bit of shadow. I think I need some more bark differences down on the tree. And again, grays, come in with your gray, come in with your black. No perfect way. Right now we're just kind of filling in, giving it that texture. And the base of the tree is going to be under the tree, so ultimately down here we're going to get a little shadowing because the above tree is going to be preventing the light from coming down to the base. All right, probably got enough shadow. So now what I want to do, so I'm basically going to clean off my brush with some water. And I'm going to bring in my round, dry it off, and I just want to come in and kind of just spread it, just give it some texture, give it some feel. Don't want it to be so uniform because ultimately it's not, nature isn't uniform like that. It's a little more improvish. A little bit dark one up there. Take what's yours, I'll take what's left. I'm used to coming up second best. Always feel the past with them. I can add a little bit of my shadow in there just to pull it down. Okay, so I see a lot of gray. I'm going to add a little bit of black because there's, you know, let's put a little bit of one of the eyes there, you know, that you traditionally see. The eyes are usually where branches come out at some point. All right, now that we've finished up the tree, make sure you get your brushes cleaned up. You don't need the white and the black anymore for now. And now what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've applied the 5 colors I'm going to use: a red, an orange, a yellow, a light green that I just touched, great, and a darker green. And so the whole thing I want to do is fade the colors from top to bottom. So I'm going to start with the top being the darkest, and it's going to fade down. So This is where I bring in my handy dandy Q-tip. I basically just want to have a little round surface and play with it for a minute, because if you have a big distorted, you know, you basically just want to get a little dabble, and you don't want perfection. The other thing that also works with this is the end of your brush. So if you turn your brush over and use the back side of your brush, like say the big one that we used earlier, and you use that, you can do the same thing and it's a fixed size. I like the Q-tip because it's inconsistent. It's not going to look uniform, and it's going to be more spontaneous. So I'm kind of dividing it into zones the way I'm going to color it. So I'm just going to come up here and lightly touch. I don't want to go too deep, because if I put too much weight in the Q-tip, then it's going to be a big blotch, and I don't want big blotches. And rotate the Q-tip just so you're getting some variance. You just don't want it to be the same. Rotate it, use the side of it. You don't like the way one turned out, go back over it. If you don't like the way two turned out, add a third. There's no wrong answer here. And again, so I'm just basically rolling my Q-tip to get it to a point, just because I'd like to have it a little bit cleaner. And there you go. Now you got some cool little leaves. As it starts to fade out, do it again. Now this time I'm going to roll it again, give it a little bit more of a point. Those are pretty uniform, so I'm going to let it be a little bit distorted on the next one, just so I'm not looking too much the same. So I'll bring in some heavier, because the light and the heavy mix fine. Again, creating a contrast, not the same. Now, what I would say is less is more. It's easier to add. It's a lot more difficult to take away. So rather than overdo it to begin with, let's be a little bit more sparing. And I'll just say, this is probably my red for now. And if I need to thicken it up or add more, I'll come in with some more later. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna flip my brush over, my Q-tip over, and I'm gonna start dabbing in the orange, bringing in the same thing. With the strings like that, again, just roll it. It'll kind of make it more uniform. And you just wanna kind of come in. The red and the orange kind of mix a little bit, but not very much. Ultimately, we're fading from one color to the next. And one of the things I like about the aspen is the shimmering of the leaves when the wind is blowing. They're round and they kind of make that shuddery sound. It's kind of cool. So when you're making them, you can imagine these little leaves just shaking and making the noise as the wind blows. Kind of fun. Mixing a little bit there. I'm going to come down more because I have, again, we're sticking to the branches for the most part. We can always add couple occasional in here, you know, because maybe there was a little branch that we didn't see defined, and that's okay. There's no wrong answer. Again, trial and error. So as I'm getting red paint on my hand because I'm using the orange side, that would be the reason you wanted to break it off and just use the stem of it. All right. So orange, pretty good. I might do a couple more later. But again, just getting a feel for it. I've got 3 more colors to go, so I need to leave myself some space to work with. So now I'm gonna get myself a new Q-tip, and we're gonna go with the yellow. Again, same process, give it a good roll. And you know what, the yellow is gonna kind of mix in with the orange. It's gonna overlap a little. I really like the yellow leaves. That's right there in the middle of fall when it's starting to drop them. You know what? That yellow to me is a little bit bright. So I'm going to bring a little bit of the orange and just give it a little bit of a scrape, clean it up. It's going to make it a little bit darker of a yellow and a little bit more orange, just to be a better fade. So now I come in and it looks a little bit more like a darker yellow. I still have the light yellow too, so I can do the best of both. And I actually think there needs to be a little bit of orange in there too. So we'll bring a couple orange in because they've mixed. Again, can add more as we go. I have 2 more greens to go, so I don't want to do too much, but some of the yellows will mix up into these oranges, and I will bring some oranges up into the reds just so that they kind of fade into each other a little bit cleaner. All right, so we've got the idea going. So now I'm going to bring in the green, the light green. Not going to do a lot of the light green because we're kind of getting short on space, but we're going to see it transition for sure. And if you find that you're not getting enough paint, when you dab, just come back over it, add some more. Gives it that layered look too if you do it multiple times in the same area without overdoing it. I think there's a branch right in here that's facing us that we just are catching a glimpse of. Maybe there's a little bit of green hitting up into this orange. And with that, we'll probably bring a couple lighter ones down. And now I'm going to bring in the dark green because we're running out of branches. And we can always add more branches if you feel like you don't have enough. So again, Q-tip, green, a little blending it in. And make it fun, you know? If you want to extend it out more, you don't have a branch showing, then make a clump of leaves that hide the branch. Maybe there's more branch over here that just we're not seeing it because the branch is buried by the leaves. And that's the right idea. There's some green in this coming off that guy. You know, so you've kind of got the transitions going from the red to the orange, to the yellow, to light green, to the dark green. And, you know, let's say, okay, I want to add another branch, and I'll show you what that looks like. So basically, go back to your round, get a little bit of your white, and you're just going to come in, and you're going to just pull one up off to here. So, hey, I think that needs to be another branch right here. So, no problem. We'll add it. And he's got a little shoot coming off here. He needs a little bit like that. Maybe just a little guy right here. Okay, so those are pretty basic right now. Let's add a little bit. Bring in your 0, clean your brush, bring in your 0, and let's just add a little bit of highlight, low light, that kind of stuff to help it match the rest of the tree. A little bit of black just to give it that connection. All right, so we've blended that in pretty well. Again, we're about to bury it under color, so perfection is not necessary. Let's bring in a little bit more of that dark green. You need a little bit more representation. I see my leaves are a little bit light there, so I'm going to bring in a little bit more heavy color, a little heavier on the dab. And I think this green really grounds it really well, kind of pulls it down into the ground with the natural colors. You know, I think we need a little bit of light green in there too. Maybe it snuck a couple of light greens in there, just to give it a little bit of a breakup. Oh yeah, a couple got in there too. You know, and this is where you would want to go over and say, okay, what's missing? I see I have a little bit of a blank spot in this area. So you know what? I'm gonna go get my Q-tip again. I'm gonna get my yellow. And now the yellow is a little bit translucent, so I'm gonna come in a little bit heavier with the yellow so we're not seeing directly through the leaf every time. But I'm also gonna integrate it up here more so it gets a better showing. Over here, kind of come in a little more heavy. It's hard to see a lone leaf on an aspen, so they're usually clustered. So when you're putting them together, just know that if there's one, there's probably 3 or 4. I think that needs a little bit of orange in there, they're mixing pretty well. So in this orange I have some see-through translucent oranges, so I'm gonna come back over, thicken that up a little bit, put a little bit heavier of a dollop on it, and I'm gonna bring some red into it too, just for a little bit better integration and migration from one color to the next. So I think we've got the orange where it needs to be. Now I'm going to bring in a little bit of, I'm going to put a couple of oranges up top because they were mixing into the red as the red is getting ready to do, mixing in with them. So again, coming in now, I'm going to put in some reds, drop them down into here. So it pulls your eye more smoothly from one color to the next. It's not a stark change from one color to the other. Your eye is naturally going to draw down as it sees the colors melting into the next color. So again, I don't like how some of these turned out. They're a little bit light, so I want to come in and bush it up a little bit, put a few more dabs in there just to give it a little more presence of leaves. And again, you get those imperfections when you have a little hair hanging off your Q-tip. If you don't like that, roll it so you get it cleaned up. We are getting close. Again, the layering effect, you can see here where we did all of our tree and everything, and ultimately we're not really showing the whole tree. We have faded and hidden some of it behind some of the leaves. And so building the layers from the farthest to the closest is how you can achieve that goal. So I think this is pretty good. I think I need a little bit more light green, and then I probably am going to be good. The light green came a little bit thin, so I'm going to put a little bit more weight on it. And I love it when you put a dollop on and it has that little tail that pulls off, because that leaves a little bit of a stem coming off the leaf, and it's a cool effect. All right, so one of the things you need to remember when you're painting is you're spending so much time up here close to it. You need to step back 10 feet away, look at it from a distance, because all those things that you are probably bothered by your own imperfections in your process, when you step back and look at it like it was on a wall, it changes the perspective completely. It also, and when you're doing abstract and such like that, it gives you leads into what comes next if you don't already have a destination in mind. So remember that. Step back, take a seat, stare at it for a few minutes, make sure it is what you want it to be. And then, so what I noticed when I took a step back is that in this area right here, I really don't have a lot of good yellow. So I'm going to bring in a little bit more yellow to help thicken that up. And again, same process, rinse and repeat. Got a Q-tip, I'm going to bring it in, but I'm going to put it in pretty heavy because the yellow, again, is also very translucent. So I really want that to cover what's under it, so it really pops off the canvas. I think that the yellow is going to go out a little bit farther because this branch has more going, a little bit too much paint. Again, that yellow is coming up into the orange so that it transitions the colors and your eye just follows it down to the next level. I almost feel like this needs to have a little bit of a branch coming off here that we just don't see, that we just are going to create by having leaves come off it. A little bit fuller. I got a little too much paint there, so just roll your Q-tip, pull it up, and you can add to locations that need the extra paint. Now I see I need a little bit of orange. Same process, I'm just kind of filling in where my eye sees that there might be a little bit of a negative space showing that needs a little bit more paint. All right, let's take a step back. I think that looks pretty okay. So this is basically the process I use to create the Rainbow Aspen. Very simply colored, nothing out of the ordinary. Only a couple of mixes with the blues and the whites, and then the grays you get from the black and the white. And ultimately, that's about all the color mixing I could do. You could actually take 3 colors, the red and the green, and you could mix those and make your other colors. Just depending on how skilled you are at mixing. But we did this simply so that it was easy to follow. I see that I need a little bit more dark green, and then I'm going to be all done. All right, and that is the Rainbow Aspen. Thanks for coming to the class. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you enjoy the painting that you created, and look for more coming soon.